what is learning? The science of learning is really not very well developed. I want to piggyback on a podcast by Brett Hall. Another shout out to Brett Hall. His podcasts are very inspiring. And in fact, actually, this is almost a self-reference because he's talking about learning as an individual process that everybody kind of individually experiences, and that applies to something like a podcast too. So when I shout out to Brett Hall, I actually want to make it clear that his podcast is inspiring to me and I learn a lot from him. And maybe other people wouldn't learn a lot from him. So this is a good example of a situation where I can learn a lot and really progress in life and sort of in a Popperian way progress and find better solutions to problems because I spend time thinking and listening and communicating about Brett Hall when maybe others might find it totally boring or useless. Because learning is an individual process. Learning is applied Popperianism, if you want. And Brad talks in this particular episode that I'm referring to about the problem of institutionalized organized learning through schools and those sort of things. I just want to point out two things that are really important for the hedge fund business. First and foremost, learning is individual. So the hedge fund business is a business of learning and a knowledge business. So there is no right way to run a hedge fund because learning is individual and learning is the key to success in the hedge fund business. The way to run a hedge fund is a very individual process. And the way you accumulate knowledge and the way you learn in the hedge fund business is a very personal process. And I think second, I want to mention one thing that has come up in this podcast series a lot, which is if you know it, if you understand it, you can program it. If you can program it, you understand it. If you can't program it, you can't understand it. So wealth generation is a process that we don't understand because it's a creative process. It's a process that relies on learning. It's a process that relies on iteration. It's a process that is not given explicit fixed functions or anything like that. So that's why we can't, it's not like arithmetic or calculating the orbit of the sun, of the earth around the sun or something like that. We can't do that with wealth generation. And this leaves us hedge fund managers in a position where we kind of have to, we're tapping around in the dark. And I want to shed some more light on this process. This is a Not Even Wrong podcast. It's September 12th, 2021. This is Krim Delko. It's a Sunday. Since the last update, we are up for the year 13.7%. The market is up 19. We're underperforming by 5.3%. I want to jump right into it. So the question in again, I'm talking about a podcast that was I heard that Brett Hall gave, and it's about epistemology and the science of learning and creativity and critical thinking. And I don't want to just repeat that, of course. I just want to take what I thought was very useful for me and what I thought was very useful for my personal endeavors, and is also very useful for this particular podcast series, which is the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it runs for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. We are in the business of wealth generation at Orange Capital Partners. The purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. So I want to tie it into this purpose here and talk about the science of learning, the meta learning, in the sense that what is learning about, or how do we even go about learning? And the hedge fund business is a knowledge business, so it is really crucial to have a formation, an idea of how do we even generate knowledge that has some agency when it comes to fulfilling our purpose. Now, before I even go there, I just want to mention again, I think reading, listening to podcasts, having meetings with interesting people, talking to people, all of these things are important, but they're more like the conditioning of the mind. So I just want to put that on the side because I talk a lot about reading books and things like that. Reading books is not necessarily a direct doesn't have a real direct relationship with success in the hedge fund business. However, again, it is conditioning of the mind the same way that a martial artist has to do conditioning on a daily basis to keep the body fit and injury free. The same way I think we humans, when we're in the knowledge business in particular, should be reading a lot, thinking a lot, critical thinking, and all that is very important. And now I'm jumping into Brett Hall's comments here. First and foremost, what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is, like the word says, it is criticizing established thought. And this is very Popperian in a way that we have certain ideas, thought, and then we criticize it. And I think in the hedge fund business, we absolutely have to do that the same way we have to do it in any other knowledge business. So we have to do it in the hedge fund business. And the problem that a lot of people have, and I think this is just a little critique now I have about the industry, is that it's just very difficult to do, and it is much easier to be conventional than not conventional. In particular, when you have a certain established position in the business. I think somebody once said that it's better to be wrong with everybody else than right and nobody else does what you do, because if you're wrong and nobody else does what you do, you're going to get destroyed. In other words, if you follow the convention and you're wrong, you can blame it on the market, you can blame it on politics, and nobody will really punish you in the sense that, well, it's the market, it's not your fault. And if you're wrong, but you were unconventional, then you're just somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. So it is really, there is a tremendous amount of incentives out there to do exactly the opposite of what Brett Hall is propagating in his talk, which is be critical, try to develop new knowledge, question conventional wisdom, all these things that sound very sort of, yeah, of course that's what you should be doing, but most people don't do it. And actually, one of the really beautiful proofs, I think, that what Brett Hall is talking about and what Popperianism allows you to do is he can have ideas, for example, about financial markets without being an investor himself. I am pretty sure, I don't know Brett Hall personally, but I'm pretty sure he is not a successful hedge fund manager. I don't think he's never mentioned that. However, he has a very clear and understandable and also significant thesis about wealth generation. And that's because he has a general understanding of knowledge creation. So he can apply his general understanding of knowledge creation to the hedge fund business, he can apply to arts, to music, and that's because it's general, it's universal, and it's a good explanation of how these industries work. Now, just to be clear, he is also very clear in not saying that he knows how it works. He's just saying that because we don't know how it works, we can't program it, but of course we can gather knowledge and through critical thinking and critical questioning of conventional wisdom, we can get better at speculating, because it's called speculation. It's not called wealth generation algorithm or something like that. It is speculation because we literally don't know how to generate wealth. So we have to sort of approximate the process that we just don't understand because we can't program it. So this, I think, is definitely a very strong statement. I just wanted to reiterate that. I've said that many times in this podcast. What I want to add today is I would like to focus on the individual process. So there is no right or wrong way to generate wealth. It is an individual process. I've felt that many times. I've had that feeling. I felt when I'm asked, what is it you do? How do you make money? Even my customers, after having successful years, would ask me questions like, how do you do it? And I'm always trying to give general answers that they could maybe apply and do it themselves or things like that. And I can't. And there's another way to think about this, which is I could, for example, say, well, I'm sharing my positions, for example. I'm happy to share my positions. So why do customers need me? And the reason customers need me is because my process is very individual to me. Nobody can replicate what I do. Nobody can do it. You can go now on our website, www.orangecapitalpartners.com. There is somewhere there's a spreadsheet. There's actually a PowerPoint presentation with our positions. It's updated on a quarterly basis. So you would see our positions at least until last quarter. And sometimes it's even updated in mid-quarter, but we're not very religious about that. So you could just replicate that. And if you want to be really smart, you can write a small program that just follows any updates on our website. And if whenever we change that particular presentation, you just adjust your position. So you could have an algorithm follow us. And I am still 100% sure that you would not, after 10 years, have the same returns that we have, because you would not understand certain intricacies of leverage and things like that. But most importantly, because it's not individual to you, and because, okay, here's another caveat. If you did this, if you just followed us blindly and somehow had a sort of a demon or somebody, make sure that you can never interfere with your own personal thoughts, that you can never sell or buy or do something that you feel like you need to be doing right now, which is contrary to what we're doing. If you could assure that, then yes, you would actually replicate our returns. But the point here is that you would not, because investing, wealth generation is a creative process. It's a process that depends on knowledge creation. It is individual, it is bespoke. It is not generalizable, because, and this is now the big insight I have and the relationship between Brett Hall's presentation, which is that he says that learning is a very personal process. And I think learning is a personal process when it comes to children learning in school, but it applies more general to anything learning. So art, music, hedge fund, wealth generation, learning how to be a better husband, learning how to be a better father, learning how to be a better mother, a better wife. Whatever requires knowledge, it is a personal process. In particular, when knowledge compounds. And this is why it is personal. In fact, this is the explanation for why knowledge creation is a personal process, because we are all building our own small individual innovation stacks. We're building our innovation stacks, for example, about a relationship we have with our spouse. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody else is solving problems, creating new problems, solving those problems in that particular context. So hence, there is no book, How to Be the Perfect Husband or How to Be the Perfect Wife. There just isn't. Because it would be futile to write a book like that, because it's personal. The same way it would be futile to write a book, what is the best way to learn and succeed as a student in school. Now, I just want to caveat this for 1 second. I don't want to talk about this too much, but of course I could write a book about saying how to pass exams, which for some people would be equivalent to being a successful student. This is not what I'm talking about. Passing exams is not a creative process. To some extent it is creative, but it is pretty understood. I think there is enough literature. In fact, we could write an algorithm. We could program a program that gets maximum SATs and et cetera, et cetera. In fact, I think that's already possible with GPT-3 and things like that. But my point here is that what I'm trying to say here is that real creative thinking, the kind of thinking that we care about as humans, that we care about as, well, when we talk about creativity, critical thinking, knowledge creation, wealth generation, whatever, all these words are synonyms for building an innovation stack. My relationship with my wife is an innovation stack that I'm building with her, and nobody else can replicate that. So my child's education should be an innovation stack. Now, we have this thing called institutional education, school, or whatever you want to call it, and that is, of course, going against the grain. It is exactly the opposite of an innovation stack. It is trying to sort of standardize learning and all that. And I think I absolutely agree with other critical thinkers that we are actually educating our children to oblivion. Our children are not equipped for a world of creative critical thinking, because our education system is the exact opposite of that. So it's not just that we are not doing a good job, we're trying, but we're not doing a good job. In fact, we have designed our education system in a way that it achieves the exact opposite goals: convention, pursuing specific goals such as passing exams, which is, I would say, a little bit like the pay-per-click economy of Nick Bostrom. So we have children that are phenomenal at passing exams, but we don't create an army of creative thinkers that can lift us to the next generation of wealth generation or anything like that. Now, having said all of that, of course, we do have, people fall through the cracks, often people that drop out of school, people that don't finish actually school, interestingly enough. And the reason they do that is because I guess they are building an innovation stack around themselves, and they at some point cannot function anymore in the traditional education system. So this will be, I think, the first point that I just want to bring home here, that a hedge fund is building an innovation stack around your own personal experience in knowledge creation. I've said that on one of the previous episodes, that in fact the investments we make in companies are geared towards companies that are building an innovation stack themselves. So the concept of innovation stack, which is one of the principles that we're building our hedge fund around, it doesn't just apply to the entrepreneurs, the companies that we invest in, it applies to us also. We, as a hedge fund, we are also building an innovation stack around, let's say, the innovation stacks that we invest in. So in a sense, we're compounding the innovation stack. And the innovation stack is just another word for critical thinking, for finding your own pathway, your own process through problem solving. And because of that, it is just not a predetermined, it's not a deterministic process. Just because of that alone, there's other reasons why it's not deterministic, or in other words, we can't program it. So it's very difficult to generalize it. And that's why I think people need other people to generate wealth for them. Otherwise, everybody would do it themselves. We would have machines that can do that, and we don't. The kind of computerized trading that we hear about in sort of algo trading contexts is not what I'm talking about here. That is front running, that is taking liquidity risk and things like that. That is not creative wealth generation by building innovation stacks. So this would be the first comment I would like to make in the context of learning, which is, again, learning is an individual process, and the successful hedge fund of the future and the past, but in particular the future, is the kind of hedge fund that learns individually. There is no other way. You have to build an innovation stack around your own thinking, around your own critical thinking, and then go from there and extrapolate to companies. And it's a symbiosis between your investment portfolio and your own critical thinking and your own development and your own growth as a person and hedge fund manager. And that's why it's so difficult to replicate that. That's why there is no such thing as, well, such and such was successful with a hedge fund and then 10 other hedge funds showed up doing the same exact thing. These things just don't happen, because this is an individual creative process, very similar to music and arts and things like that. So the second thing I wanted to mention today, it's a little bit more, let's say, educational and less, it's maybe not directly applicable now to the hedge fund business, but in a sense it is, because what I'm trying to say in the second part of this episode is that we believe that there is a bottleneck in creative companies, and companies for wealth generation are kind of limited by one thing, which is human capital. And the reason the limit is human capital is because we educate so much of our workforce through standardized learning, or what somebody like Elon Musk would call the legacy system, which is universities and all that, when in fact it would be much more beneficial if we had a whole new way of educating our children. And that new way should be something along the lines of self-learning, which goes back to the concept we also would like to see applied within Tesla when it comes to self-driving. But let's not confuse these two things. What I'm trying to say here is that when I say that ideally a car would learn how to drive by self-learning, then I'm not limiting that just to a machine learning how to drive. In fact, any kind of computer, including our own brains, would be much better off by self-learning than by standardized learning. And I think the bottleneck that we're seeing in terms of human capital and the people coming out of universities through legacy systems and all those things that are, I think, limiting the ability to hire interesting people and not just hire. You can hire people with skills, but it's very, very difficult to hire people that have the ability to critically think, to build an innovation stack around problems, and then grow with the company and solve much bigger problems and create innovation stacks around even bigger problems and so on and so forth. That's why companies like Tesla, the CRISPR companies, and the blockchain companies, and all these companies, they really are all not lying when they say the biggest resource that is scarce is actually the human capital. And it's not because people aren't available. We're not talking here about some macroeconomic job shortage of job applicants or something like that. They just don't exist. We need more creative thinkers, and we don't have them because a big percentage of the kids that we produce as society and educate are excuse me, are miseducated, or we kind of educate the creativity out of their brains. So what would be my solution? This is now the critical thing. I think what I just said is not something that people would be shocked. Everybody would say, yeah, I know, my child is not creative enough, but what am I supposed to do? Well, how am I supposed to, well, you want me not to send my child to school? And, I unfortunately don't have an answer. This is a societal question. This is, like they call it in the software business, it's software debt or legacy debt, or another way to describe this is you're locked in. So a little bit like the British, the subway in London doesn't have air conditioning because they just didn't know air conditioning back then. So they built the whole thing based on the fact that there's no air conditioning, and now you cannot retroactively build air conditioning, so people suffer in London. Another lock-in is when the self-drive industry started with the DARPA challenge in the noughties, so 2004, 5, 6, something like that. Computer vision just wasn't developed, so the whole idea to build a computer vision only self-drive system wasn't around because computer vision wasn't good enough, and therefore people got locked in, and they're still locked in trying to use LiDAR and sensor fusion and whatnot, when in fact today computer vision is much better, not just because of the algorithms, but also the cameras are so much more better. So again, we're kind of locked in like that. We have an education system that was built in a time when creative thinking was not desired. Maybe people didn't even know about it. Popper wasn't even alive when, let's say, Bismarck and the French, Napoleon, and these people started building industrial nations around institutionalized education, because the purpose of that education was not to build critical thinkers. It was to build soldiers, officers, industry workers, things like that, people that can execute orders at scale. We were back then sort of doing what maybe today the GPU industry is doing. We were trying to do SIMD, so single instruction, multiple execution kind of thing. So we give one instruction to 100,000 people and they execute, and so on and so forth. That was the idea back then. This was what the 19th century was all about. You build railways, you build big ships, you build this and that, and then of course you start wars with large armies, and you send 10,000 troops everybody's doing exactly the same thing, and you just overwhelm your opponent by sheer size and volume and all that. That's all gone today. We don't need that anymore. In fact, it's futile to have armies like that. It's a waste of money. What we need is creative thinking, individual thinking, building innovation stacks around smaller problems, and also attacking problems in a much more adaptive way, much more flexible way. That's the kind of stuff we need. And even in warfare, we're suffering because we're not able to adapt to, let's say, the Taliban and those types of guerrilla type warfare, because we have a different system. But anyway, getting back to, so we're locked in with the education system. It's a problem. My solution would be to take risks. I mean, this is what I can now give. My comments here are as a father. It is try to build financial independence into my kids and the people I care about, not just my kids, but people I care about. Give them some sort of financial independence, but optimize it in a way that they don't become lazy vegetables, but they have that ability to take the risk and maybe step out of the system and try to do an amount of self-learning that puts them in a position to be more creative, critical thinkers, because again, that, in my view, is the future of education, the future of learning, and the future of wealth generation. Thank you.